Hello, good afternoon. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is joint work with Andrea Gonzalez, Leo Iacovone, Santiago Llamas, and Martin Rossi. Let me start by motivating a bit export promotion policies. The aim of those policies is to promote export development and diversification, which is thought to be key for economic development. There is a well-known market failure involved, which is the lack of information and knowledge about foreign markets. And this justifies public intervention. In fact, more than 100 countries have national export promotion agencies. And among the many things that those agencies do, the many services that they provide, like organizing attendance to trade fairs or commercial missions, they increasingly provide capability building services. So this is what this paper is about. It's a program implemented as an RCT about building capability for exporting differentiated products from developing countries. This is largely based on work that I've done in the past with co-authors Artopoulos and Friel, where we did some case studies, qualitative case studies, on the export emergence of new differentiated good producing sectors in Argentina. And one of the main findings in that work was that consistent exporters from Argentina to developed countries adopted a set of business practices that depart largely from those prevailing in the domestic market. And so there are many things that they do differently when they start export, not when they start, when they set a continuous business in a foreign country. We're going to codify those practices here, but they belong to three broad families. One has to do with adapting products to foreign demand. It's rarely the case that an exporter succeeds in the export market, in a developed market, with the same product he or she succeeded at home. They are related to improving production processes to upgrade quality. This is always there. And also with establishing long-term relationships with foreign distributors and adapting to their business practices. And one of the main challenges is that domestic producers in general have a hard time getting this foreign market knowledge, the foreign market knowledge that is required as a background knowledge to adopt these practices. And this is consistent with evidence by Miona Nopromola in a couple papers, also this famous paper by David Atkin, Amit Khandelwal, and co-authors on exports of carpets from Egypt. One more thing also, we study who were the pioneers, the export pioneers in those industries and what made them different. And also a surprising fact surprising finding is that the distinguishing thing about these pioneers is not their having a superior technological knowledge, but their acquisition, maybe in general for random reasons, of this foreign market knowledge. And I point to that because for firms in developing countries, here I focus on middle-income countries, this is a key challenge. This is a problem acquiring this knowledge. And because of this gap in consumption patterns and business practices that they have to bridge, and maybe they lack the knowledge to do it, maybe connecting it to what we talk about here, we can think that for developing countries, export promotion policies should be a more important component maybe of an industrial strategy than it is for developed countries. So I want to maybe emphasize this point and the importance of export promotion. It's not as easy to set up a food consistently in a foreign country with differentiated products. Lead review, I'm going to go very fast. I'm going to just focus. There are many papers evaluating the effectiveness of different kinds of export promotion programs. I'm going to focus on those that provide capability building services. And we organize those programs in relation to which is, if you think of a route to exporting, that it has 3 stages, it depends on which stage those programs target. So there is a stage 1 in which firms are far from the export threshold. These are firms that maybe don't know anything about exporting. They don't think that they're going to export that much. And there are programs targeting these firms, maybe teaching them basic aspects of the export business, like how to deal with red taping and stuff like that. Generally in formats like training sessions, in a classroom, in virtual classes. And the evidence about these kind of programs is weak. And it's no wonder that it's weak, because it's targeting firms that are far from the export threshold. On the good side, they're very cheap. So cost-benefit wise, we don't know how effective they are. Then there are other set of studies targeting firms more, let's call it, closer to the export threshold. So these are firms that are already maybe exported some or are close to exporting. In general, the content of those programs is providing or teaching, disseminating good exporting practices, in general in the form of individual consulting. And this paper will be about this. And the evidence is that the impact is more on the extensive margin, not on the intensive margin, which makes sense, because they're teaching them to export, to get into the export market. There is also a related literature which we call the indirect route. If you think of you take very, like the Melitz model very explicitly, you would think that rather than teaching them how to export, you just teach them how to be more productive. By implication, they're going to export. And there are some papers that kind of do that, and the evidence there is mixed. And then there is a stage 3, where this targets firms already exporters. They have some export experience. In general, they're not teaching them how to export. They're helping them connect with other customers and other kinds of help. And in general, the format is some kind of marketing training. And the evidence there is that the impact is on the intensive margin, and which also makes sense. They know how to export. That are helping them get farther along, exporting more. And the last paper I want to mention is by Eric and Nadia Ali and co-authors about, it's not a capability building service, but we also, the way we understand it, it's also kind of targeting firms at stage 3, and the results are also consistent. The impact is more on the intensive margin. So what we do here, it's an RCT for a stage 2 capability building program. We codify 20 good exporting practices. The intervention involves a 72-hour technical assistance on those practices for 213 SMEs in the food and beverages sector in Argentina. And I think there are many studies, only a few doing RCTs. I think we think this is the first RCT of this kind of program, of what we call stage 2, like providing teaching them some kind of good exporting practices. What we find when we analyze the impact on the full sample, we find no impact. Then trying to think what happened, actually the program went smoothly. We had very good feedback from many firms, so it was surprising. We tried to think what happened, and there were some, so it was everything went smoothly except for the enrollment period. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, but just for you to, in advance, to know where I'm going. We're going to identify firms that should have received the program from firms that should not have received the program. And when we focus on the good selection sample, we find large and significant impact, but only on the extensive margin. 33 percentage point higher probability of exporting 6 years later. Regarding evidence on the impact of the intervention on the adoption of good exporting practices, the results are positive, but not robustly significant across specifications. I'm going to tell you we think it's due to some issue I'm going to talk about later. So this is the summary of the whole thing. So good exporting practices, again, it's based on work that I've done in the past, but also drawing from other sources. Some national export promotion agencies, they have made explicit what they think are good exporting practices. So based on all this information, we codified 20 good exporting practices. And we implemented in analogy to this famous paper by Bloom and Van Reenen about good management practices, same structure. So, but in contrast to them, rather than management practices, this program is about teaching them how to export. Not only how to export, it's how to deal with the whole export business. In contrast to management practices, these practices are not standardized, not internationally recognized, not globally widespread. So this might have an impact on the impact of the program, right? The 20 practices are grouped into 7 areas of practice. These are, take a look at them. For instance, in market identification, one is market segmentation. The firms, whether they segment the market before, when they target the market, they have to segment it, they have to think about the positioning strategy. All these are different practices. This is one. In production, you have ensuring product quality, an obvious one. In distribution, building trust with the distribution channel. Consistent exporters do lots of things to build trust with the distribution channel. The intervention. So it was implemented by Argentina's National Export Promotion Agency, together with the Secretary of Trade. I was a public office at the time, with the World Bank. Between March 2017 and December 2019, yes?
Sorry, just one question about the export practices. I'm curious from this or your previous work, are there a lot of private sector firms that offer consulting services or sort of a certain dissimilar vision for what those practices are? I'm curious because informal evidence that maybe Bloom, Van Reenen, and friends are onto something is that it's pretty close to what the management consultants themselves say. So maybe it's known that there's some demand for that bundle of expertise. So I'm just curious if it comes up.
There are firms that do provide consulting. There are many freelancers. Actually, some of those freelancers, we hire them as consultants. But again, there's no set of agreed upon set of good exporting practices. And those firms are not that large. They are very tiny firms. And in general, it's not usual that firms hire those firms. Yeah.
Since you have food and beverage, is there a big difference between wine versus not wine? Because I would imagine that for the wine...
it's mostly food. Actually, there are very few beverages. It's mostly food.
Because that would be interesting to see whether in a particular sector where Argentina has a lot of international presence already, right? Maybe the barrier is smaller.
No, not here. In this program, we didn't have wine producers. It's not. If there are just a few, but not. It's mostly food producers.
Juan Carlos, can you say something about the complementarities among the practices? I know that you think that there are some, that these things have to be done.
But that's a very good question. In that qualitative study, I think it was a big thing, understanding that changing the practices was important. Like this idea that when I go abroad, I have to change things. In this framework, it was very hard to capture that. But practice number 1, which is under strategy, tries to capture this. How do you set your export business? And so it has many questions. It's very codified, right? So it tries to measure to what extent you are aware that when you go abroad, you're going to have to change things, that it's not like doing this, an extension of what you do domestically. So there is one practice that tries to capture this. I'm not sure how much it captures it, but yes, complementarity is important. Okay, sorry, maybe did I say everything? Okay, and it was delivered at no cost, and the focus is on food and beverages, mostly food. Let me skip the enrollment process because I'm going to talk about it in detail. So the structure, again, it follows Bloom and Van Reenen, so there are 3 phases. First, there is a baseline survey for all firms where we score, the consultants score the adoption of good exporting practices. Then the technical assistance, the consulting on the treated firms, and then again the follow-up survey. Almost 70% of firms completed both surveys. There are no issues with attrition. I'm not going to show it, but there's nothing to worry about there. On the diagnostic phase, it was in 2017. Each consultant first underwent 16-hour training in the framework, in the Good Exporting Practices framework. I was also involved in doing that. And then the survey was administered in 9 hours in different days. And they scored, each practice had a score from 0 to 5, so the total was 100 points. The technical assistance, treated firms received a 72-hour individual consulting over a 6-month period. They could choose among alternative assistant packages, but except for 10% of firms, for all of them, the core was what we call the strategy package, which had to do with how you set up your export business, how you choose the target to market, how you define a position in strategy. And the consulting involved building and starting a work plan. For example, a typical plan would be to set an objective, entering an export market and defining a strategy to deal with it. 10 minutes. So then follow-up case, we have administrative records. The outcomes will have to do with export variables. The dependent variables will be number 2, it's a dummy for whether you export or not. That will be the key variable. Number 3, it captures the extensive margin. Number 3 captures the intensive margin. And because of the issue of the zeros, we have a number 1 that is the inverse hyperbolic sign transformation. In the pre-plan, we said that it was number 1. Then we learned that it's not robust to scaling. But in any case, it just captures, it's a combination of the two. So the results are consistent with what we have in 2 and 3, which is yes 2 and no 3. And there are other additional variables, but again are consistent with extensive yes, intensive no. I have to rush because I have only 9 minutes left. Balancing tests, everything is balanced except for one thing, which is practical total score. We randomize first, and then we administered the survey, and it turned out that it was unbalanced between treated and untreated firms. This was a mistake. We should have done it the other way around. So it has it implies a problem for identifying the adoption of practice as the main mechanism. We'll have, it will hamper a bit our ability to see that. The specification is an ANCOVA linear model. For each year, we have a cross-section with the treated, whether you were treated or not. It's a latte, like how do you call it? The assignment as the instrument. And then for robustness, we do a diff in diff. So the result for the full sample, remember, it's going to be, we're not going to see results. So this is the main variable, which is the extensive margin, export participation. The two blues are firms assigned to treatment, dark blue, control, and you see nothing happens. The program ended here in 2018, and then we had some 19 was some macroeconomic turmoil in Argentina, 220 and 21 was the pandemic. This is the same thing in a regression, nothing. Well, very weak results. Event study, same thing. Let me skip this. Regarding the adoption of practices, this is, we see a lot of, much more change in the adoption of practices for treated firms than for control firms. In fact, it's 23% versus 8%. When we do this econometrically with the diff in diff, it's significant. When we do it with ANCOVA, it's not significant. We think ANCOVA interprets this as some kind of mean reversion. So results for the good selection sample. So let me tell you about the thing about screening. So we had a kind of a time schedule. The guys at the agency, they had to do it in the enrollment process in 45 days. And it was already 3 weeks, and we had 70 firms, around 70, 80 firms. So and they were in a rush for budgetary and political reasons. They had to do it. They wanted everything. All firms, they had some timeline. We had to stick to that timeline. And so they started increasing pressure on people involved in recruiting firms and recruiting them. And we think there were two margins in which, along which we got firms that shouldn't have got in the program. One is that 59 out of 213 participating firms actually produced non-differentiated products, and these, like beans was a lot, vegetables. We weren't aware of this in time to prevent that from happening. The other thing is that also during the administration of the program, some firms expressed that it wasn't what they expected, or they didn't show commitment to the effort that this program involved. So what we figured out later is that we had the order of firms in which they enrolled. And so we make an assumption. We think of this enrollment order as a proxy for the actual willingness and commitment of the firm to participate in the program. So we do the following. We take the firms actually producing differentiated good products. We take the half of firms that enrolled earlier. And so we get a subsample, which we call with the good selection sample. The sample of firms of the type that should have been the target, that all firms should have been like this, like those firms. And when we look at export participation by treatment group, we see that here we find a big difference. These are 33-point difference between the treated and control, so we see an impact. One important thing here is it's not only firms that didn't export that now started to export, but also firms, among firms that were exporters not leaving the export market. You know, in exporting, there is a lot of churning. So the impact, again, it's not only making firms export, it's very easy to export once to somewhere. It's like making them keep their export markets. Yes.
I'm curious because I guess it's not only kind of this type of advisory services where we see highly heterogeneous returns when there's these kind of supply side services and given to firms in developing countries. And I'm wondering, other settings authors have used machine learning techniques with like many baseline characteristics of firms to try to predict which are the firms that have the high returns to the intervention. And it might be interesting here to like put this characteristic of being in the good selection sample together with other characteristics you have, and see, you know, how well can you predict the marginal returns in your sample to this type of intervention.
Yeah, this is as much as we can go. So we had some other variables of heterogeneity, and we didn't. This was the most important thing. Yes, no, we didn't. We don't have much information about firms actually. We have the customs data and whatever they said it when they enrolled, but we don't have good information. Yes, unfortunately, we don't have that. This is the same thing econometrically. This is.
Or are you out of time? Sorry, but this is a good suggestion, no? In the sense that it can be no researcher discretion involved. No, you can let the computer tell you what dimensions to focus on rather than choosing yourself.
Yes, we can talk later. I would like to know how to do how to do that properly. Yes, but. Okay. Yeah. David Atkin, I think, told me something about it. Maybe. 2 minutes. Okay. So this is the same result econometrically. As you see, there is effect on intensive margin. It's like now it's an interaction between the treatment and the good selection. No effect on the intensive margin, and this measure that combines both margins, it's also significant capturing this, right? This is the event study. You see the impact on the extensive margin. And let me skip this. Regarding now, even constrained to the small sample, same thing about there is more impact on the adoption of good exporting practices in the treatment group, but now it's not even significant when we do the diff in diff. So even though it's 25 to 12, because of the small sample, this is not significant. Lastly, this last slide, the mechanism, when we try to do, rather than regressing outcomes, export outcomes on whether you were treated, you regress it on the adoption of practices instrumented by the assignment. We find positive but not significant causal effect. We attribute to a large extent that there are very low F-stats for the instrument. So concluding remarks, main takeaways. We learned a lot by doing this. I think that there is positive and significant impact once the right firms are targeted. The impact is limited to the extensive margin for these kind of programs. This is the magnitude. And the presumed mechanism, we don't have strong evidence, is the adoption of good exporting practices. We don't have an alternative story of why we find this impact on the extensive margin rather than the actual adoption of good exporting practices. Lessons, accurate targeting is important. I think this, what we faced is a common problem when agencies do these kind of programs. Also understanding what you're targeting, good screening is critical. Again, in a rush to get power, you get firm. What happened to us, I think, is more usual than you get firms without, the program is not for every firm. You have to choose carefully which firms are likely to enjoy to take advantage of the program in the lines of what you're saying. And there is some investment, I think, needed in standardizing and codifying good exported practices. Thank you very much.